It was late, around midnight, when Mia checked into the Lincoln Hotel, a grand old building on the edge of a small coastal town. It had been there for over a century, standing proud against years of storms and neglect. She was visiting for business, but a mix-up left her with the only room available, a long, unused one on the fifth floor. When the receptionist, an older man with a sunken gaze, handed her the key, his fingers lingered as he muttered, "Don't go out at night." The elevator clattered up, emitting a metallic groan as it stopped on the fifth floor. When the doors opened, Mia stepped out into the stale, unmoving air. The hallway stretched long and dark, with only the faint, flickering light from the old fixtures casting long shadows. She shivered, half wishing she'd ignored her company's frugal travel plan and booked somewhere more lively. Her room, 513, was tucked away at the end of the hallway. She turned the key, feeling a strange resistance as she pushed the door open. The room was simple, almost too plain, with a bed, dresser, and a cracked mirror mounted on the wall. It smelled faintly of mildew, and the wallpaper was peeling in places, exposing yellowed plaster beneath. She wrinkled her nose, but dropped her bags anyway, too tired to care. As she was about to settle in, a soft thudding sound caught her attention. It came from above, almost like footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Mia rolled her eyes. Old hotels were full of noises, she reminded herself. She decided to ignore it, set an alarm, and lay down, hoping for a few hours of decent sleep. She had barely closed her eyes when a loud, scraping noise jolted her awake. This time, it was closer, like it was right outside her door. Her pulse quickened, and she lay still, straining her ears to listen. Nothing. She let out a shaky breath, dismissing it as her mind playing tricks. Then the voice came, a soft, whispering, childlike voice. "Come play with me." The voice drifted in, muffled, as though someone was speaking from the other side of the wall. She froze, wide-eyed. Her logical mind fought against the swell of panic. It was a hotel, she reasoned, probably just a child in the next room. But the whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. "I want to play. I'm waiting. Just open the door." Mia clutched the sheets tighter, fear sinking its cold claws into her chest. She checked the time on her phone, 3:13 a.m., and glanced toward the door. Just as she was about to dismiss it as her imagination, the doorknob turned slowly, creaking as it twisted, followed by a faint scratching on the wood. Mia couldn't take it any longer. She threw off the covers and approached the door. Her hand hovered over the knob as her heart pounded in her chest. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. Silence. For a moment, she felt silly, standing there like a character in a horror movie. She shook her head, returned to the bed, and tried to close her eyes again, but the silence quickly became oppressive. The feeling of being watched gnawed at her, an intense unease prickling over her skin. Suddenly, a gust of cold air swept through the room, chilling her to the bone. She glanced around, realizing that the window she'd left closed was now wide open, curtains billowing inwards as if something had forced its way inside. Mia shot up, slamming the window shut, but as she turned, she saw something in the mirror, someone standing right behind her. It was a boy, pale and thin, with hollow eyes that stared into hers through the glass. His mouth was open in a silent scream, frozen in a look of terror. She whipped around, but the room was empty. Heart pounding, she backed away from the mirror, afraid to look but unable to tear her gaze from it. Suddenly, the whispering returned, louder this time, echoing around the room. "Come play with me. Come outside." Her skin crawled as the voice took on a pleading tone, desperate and haunting. Against every instinct, she flung open the door, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was tormenting her. The hallway was empty, but now the whispering was coming from the end of the corridor. She could see a shadow darting around the corner, quick and jittery, just out of sight. Gripped by a bizarre curiosity, she took a step forward, her feet moving of their own accord. As she reached the end of the hallway, she saw the figure again, a small, thin boy, his back to her as he stood in front of the elevator doors. Are you lost?" she stammered, her voice barely audible. The boy didn't move, but she heard him speak again, his voice a hollow echo. "They locked me in here. Left me alone." He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to catch a glimpse of his hollow, haunting eyes. Mia staggered back, the realization dawning. The receptionist's warning, the noises, the strange behavior of the staff, it was all connected. This boy wasn't alive. Panic surged through her, and she raced back to her room, slamming the door shut behind her. Her hands trembled as she searched for her phone, frantically dialing the front desk. The receptionist answered, his voice low and tired. "What's wrong, miss?" There's a child on this floor. He's dead. He was talking to me. I saw him," she gasped. There was a long pause before the man finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "That floor is closed. No one has stayed there in years. That room, it's not supposed to be occupied." "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "I'm in 513. You gave me the key." Another silence then. 513? That room was sealed after the boy was found. His voice trailed off, heavy with the weight of something unspeakable. She sank to the floor, the horror finally settling in. "He was left there to die, wasn't he?" "Yes," the man whispered, sounding far away. "And he doesn't like being alone." The line went dead, leaving Mia in deafening silence. Her heart raced as she glanced around the room, dread pooling in her stomach. Then she heard it again. The scratching, the voice, closer this time. "Please, don't leave me alone." The doorknob rattled, and Mia could feel a cold presence creeping closer. She knew that if she opened the door, she'd see him again, but this time he wouldn't let her leave. The last sound she heard was the voice's soft, haunting whisper. "Thank you for staying. Forever." The day Clara and Ben stumbled upon the Weathering estate, they hadn't planned on entering. The mansion stood abandoned in the middle of the woods, covered in ivy, its windows shattered and dark. No one went near it, not since the tragic story had spread through town. The estate where a family of 6 had simply vanished one night. But Clara, curious to a fault, dragged Ben in with a playful smirk. "Come on, just a peek. We'll tell everyone we went inside the haunted mansion." Reluctantly, Ben followed, his sense of caution warring with her infectious thrill. As they stepped inside, an icy chill settled over them. The air was heavy, as if holding back secrets, and the scent of damp wood and rot filled their noses. Clara flicked her flashlight around, casting flickering shadows over the walls lined with dust-covered paintings of the Weathering family. Stiff, stoic faces frozen in time. The two wandered through the grand hall, the silence oppressive. But when they passed a mirror in the hallway, Clara stopped. "Ben, look." The mirror was cracked, its silver lining discolored with age. But as they looked into it, their reflections flickered, distorted. And then, just for a split second, Clara saw something else in the glass. The faint outline of a woman standing behind them, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. Ben saw it too. "Let's go," he whispered, gripping her arm tightly. They turned, but the hallway now seemed longer, stretching in both directions as though they'd wandered into a maze. They started down one end, their footsteps echoing too loudly. Then the scratching. At first faint, it quickly grew louder, as if something sharp was scraping against the walls and ceiling around them. "Clara, hurry," Ben urged, pulling her as they picked up the pace, but no matter how fast they moved, the scratching seemed to close in. Finally, they stumbled upon a door and burst through, finding themselves in a darkened library. Dust floated in thick clouds, and a thick layer of grime coated the shelves. Clara's flashlight flickered. She tapped it, trying to keep the beam steady. As it flashed, they noticed something strange. Each flash illuminated shadows, but these shadows were moving. Then a voice echoed in the room. Soft, high-pitched, and childlike, it whispered, "Help me, please." Clara whipped around, shining her flashlight toward the source, but there was no one there. The voice continued, pleading, "They're coming. They're coming back." Clara's breath caught in her throat as she shone her light onto a small chair tucked into a corner of the room. There sat a doll, lifelike, pale, with glassy blue eyes and lips sewn shut with crude, dark thread. Its face was twisted as though it were in pain. Ben took a step back, eyes wide, but Clara felt an unnatural pull, like she couldn't look away. The child's voice grew louder. "Please, help me. They took me here, made me stay." Just then, the doll's glassy eyes snapped to meet Clara's. Her flashlight died completely. In the darkness, Ben grabbed her arm, whispering, "Let's go, Clara. We need to leave." But the door they'd come through was gone. In its place was another mirror, taller and more polished than the others. And in the dim light filtering through a crack in the boarded-up window, they could see shadows, dozens of them, moving on the other side of the glass. "Run!" Clara yelled, pulling Ben toward the opposite side of the room. But with each step they took, The shadows grew thicker, their voices louder, whispering accusations and curses, all jumbled, yet strangely rhythmic. When they tried to scream, their voices were lost in the roar of whispers. A cold hand clamped down on Ben's shoulder. He whirled around, but no one was there. His pulse thundered in his ears as he felt the room closing in, the temperature dropping sharply. Clara? Clara, there. Suddenly, Clara felt her legs being tugged. She glanced down and saw pale, childlike hands reaching from beneath the floorboards, gripping her ankles, holding her tight. She tried to kick them off, but more hands joined, their icy grip relentless. Ben grabbed her arms, trying to pull her free, but the hands only tightened their hold. Dragging her down inch by inch, the voices grew louder, echoing in her head. Stay, stay with us. Clara's scream was lost as she was pulled through the floor, disappearing into darkness. In her last moments, she saw Ben's horrified face, his grip slipping, his voice calling her name as the floorboards snapped back into place. Ben stumbled back, alone now, his mind racing, heart pounding. He spun, searching for another exit, but every doorway led to the same room. Every mirror reflected him, but behind him in each glass stood the Weathering family, staring with empty, unblinking eyes. He closed his eyes, wishing he could wake up, wishing he'd never entered the house. Then he heard Clara's voice, faint and terrified, echoing from the walls around him. Ben, don't leave me here. He turned, only to see her face, pale and ghostly, staring at him from within the mirror, her mouth frozen in the same silent scream he'd seen earlier. The mirror cracked, her face fragmenting, shattering into pieces, but her voice kept echoing. Ben, please. He backed away, hands pressed to his ears as the whispers grew louder, filling his head, drowning out his thoughts. And then, in the final moment, he felt the icy, cold grip of tiny hands wrapping around his ankles. Marla always loved estate sales. She loved the feeling of finding a forgotten piece of history, something with a story buried in it. So when she found an old mansion sale advertised a few towns over, she couldn't resist. The house had belonged to the Fentons, a reclusive couple who'd vanished nearly 50 years ago. Rumor was they simply disappeared without a trace, leaving everything behind. She pulled up to the massive, crumbling mansion on a rainy morning. It loomed over her, all stone and shadow, with ivy twisting up its walls and broken shutters banging against the windows. An estate agent greeted her, but there were no other buyers. Marla figured the house's eerie history and remote location had kept people away. But to her, it was perfect. She started in the living room, sorting through dusty furniture and faded photo albums, moving from room to room until she finally found the attic door. It was hidden at the end of a narrow hall, slightly ajar, as if waiting for her. Something about it felt wrong. Cold air seeped down, and she heard faint, almost imperceptible whispers. But curiosity won, and she climbed the creaky stairs. The attic was packed with oddities, strange sculptures, ancient books, boxes of old clothes. But at the center of it all was an antique mirror, 7 feet tall, framed with blackened, twisted wood that seemed almost alive, carved with faces contorted in terror. It was as if the mirror had captured screams within its frame. As Marla approached, her reflection appeared dim and foggy. She tilted her head, noticing something odd. Her reflection wasn't moving. She tried waving her hand, but the figure in the mirror just stood there, staring with a strange, empty look in its eyes. A chill crawled down her spine. She looked around, wondering if the house's creepy history was playing tricks on her. But when she looked back at the mirror, her reflection was closer, pressing a hand against the glass, and Marla realized it was wearing a different expression, a cold, malicious smile. The lights flickered, and the attic seemed to darken, shadows stretching toward her. Marla stumbled back, her pulse pounding, and glanced down at the floor. There, surrounding the mirror, was a thin layer of salt, broken in several places, as if someone had desperately tried to trap something within the frame. The attic door slammed shut behind her. She froze, the realization sinking in that she was locked in with this thing. Her reflection, still grinning, tilted its head, mouthing words she couldn't hear. She tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in, her breaths coming faster. "Let me out," she whispered, as if hoping someone would hear. Then her reflection mouthed back, "I'll let you out if you let me in." The reflection's eyes glinted, and Marla watched, horrified, as it pressed its hand harder against the glass, as if testing the boundary. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. The face in the mirror was no longer hers. It was a twisted version, something dark and unnatural, wearing her features with mockery. "Let me in, Marla," it said, and this time she heard it clearly. The voice was hollow, echoing, as if the words came from a deep well. The air around her grew colder. She could see her breath now, tiny white clouds forming in the dim light. A faint sound drifted into the attic, a soft tapping like nails scratching against glass. She looked around, trying to find the source, and saw the mirror's surface was distorting, the glass warping as if something were trying to push through. She backed away, but every step she took seemed to bring her closer to the mirror, like the room itself was folding in on her. The whispers grew louder, filling her head, an indecipherable cacophony that made her want to scream. But even more terrifying was the realization that they weren't just whispers. They were voices, each one calling her name. Marla. Marla. Each time the voice sounded closer, colder, laced with a terrible hunger. She stumbled backward, bumping into boxes, but every time she tried to look away from the mirror, something would draw her gaze back. The figure inside was pressing its face against the glass, its smile widening, lips pulling back to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. "You can't leave," it whispered, its voice cracking with delight. "Not until you take my place." Desperation took over. She grabbed an old, rusted candlestick and flung it at the mirror, hoping to shatter it, to stop whatever was trying to escape. But instead of breaking, the mirror absorbed the impact, the surface rippling as though it were made of liquid. And then, with a shuddering lurch, she felt herself being pulled forward. She struggled, digging her heels into the floor, but the force was relentless, yanking her closer and closer to the mirror. Her own hand reached up, though she wasn't moving it. It was the reflection, mimicking her every motion, drawing her in with a sinister, eager expression. "No, no, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face, but her voice was swallowed by the whispers, louder now, drowning out her pleas. Her hand met the cold surface of the mirror, and it sucked her in like a vacuum, the darkness enveloping her. The last thing she saw was the reflection stepping out of the glass, grinning triumphantly as it stretched, rolling its shoulders, savoring its new freedom. Then silence. Moments later, footsteps echoed in the hall as the estate agent climbed the stairs, wondering if his client had gotten lost. He opened the attic door, calling for Marla. There she was, standing before the mirror, her back to him. "Ma'am?" he asked, concerned by her stillness. Slowly, she turned around, smiling a cold, vacant smile that made the agent shiver. Her eyes, hollow and dark, fixed on him, and the corners of her mouth twisted upwards in a way that wasn't quite human. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, her voice strange, hollow. "I was just admiring the view." The agent nodded awkwardly, unnerved but eager to leave the attic. Marla, or whatever had taken her place, watched him go, her smile widening. And as the door shut, she turned back to the mirror, her reflection waiting, watching, its mouth moving soundlessly as it screamed from behind the glass. And in that reflection, trapped forever, Marla's mouth moved, silently screaming into the darkness.